Welcome, friends, to our latest episode in the webinar series, Now and Next, How the Church is Changing for Good. If you would like to view any of our previous episodes or register for any of our future episodes, you can do so at amplifymedia.com/nowandnext. In addition, our notes from this conversation can also be found at that platform. So we're so grateful that you have come to be with us this day as we have a conversation around pastoral care. In the survey that Amplify Media did with over 1,000 church leaders, 6 out of 10 leaders said that providing pastoral care in the midst of COVID-19 was one of their top priorities. Obviously, we are navigating a very new way of being, and in this midst of collective trauma and also physical distancing, the ways in which we offer up pastoral care looks very different. And so we're grateful to our panelists who are going to help us think about the ways that we can care well for the people in our contexts during such a difficult time in all of our lives. So I'm excited to introduce those who will be our conversation partners today. We have with us Ken Carter.
Hi, it's good to be with you. I've served as a pastor for 32 years. That was certainly prior to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I served as an active bishop for 12 years, and then I was on the faculty of Duke Divinity School, where I taught practices of Christian ministry. But this topic is particularly important to me because my last 10 years I spent as the caregiver of my wife, who died in October last year from dementia. And then I have served and continue to serve as volunteer chaplain of a memory care facility, which presents particular challenges in pastoral care at this time. And I live in a retirement community where we are surrounded by the most vulnerable of the population in this pandemic, and I being one of them, of course.
Mm-hmm. Good to have you with us, Bishop Carter. We're also grateful to have with us Denise Massey.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm professor of pastoral care and counseling at Mercer University's School of Theology, McAfee School of Theology, where I teach courses in emotional intelligence and spiritual care during crisis situations and others. I'm also a clinical pastoral education pastoral educator. I've done most of my supervision with pastors and really love teaching and dialoguing with pastors about the important work that you do. And I'm particularly, I'm particularly interested in the conversation about emotional and spiritual closeness in a time of physical distancing.
We also have with us Leah McIntosh.
Thank you. I'm Leah McIntosh. I'm an ordained elder in the Missouri Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. I've been in ministry for 13 years after a career in business, and now serve in extension ministry and in coaching and training pastors and ministry leaders. So I get to be one-on-one with clergy, helping care for them and helping them lead the congregations that they're appointed to and called to. I'm also a mom of 3 kiddos who are doing homeschool right now. So we are enjoying many of the aspects of that, and also embracing the challenges of being at home and also caring for those who are beyond our walls. So it's good to be here.
It's good to have you all. As a pastor, even in the best of circumstances, it can feel very overwhelming to offer pastoral care to individuals who are going through major crises in life. What are your favorite resources or plans of action that you oftentimes use to help and encourage church leaders with pastoral care?
Well, Lisa, one of the most important things I coach pastors around is first taking care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Often, as those called to ministry, we know that God has called us to care for others, but we sometimes forget about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot effectively provide care if we are not well.
Mm-hmm.
So my first question for all of the clergy out there is, how are you caring for yourself and showing radical love and self-care for
Mm-hmm.
yourself first?
Mm-hmm.
It's like the analogy of putting on our mask first
Mm-hmm.
when we're on an airplane. So that's where I might start.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree with Leah that is the starting point. I think of love your neighbor as you love yourself. I think of one of the meanings of that passage is that when we are loving to ourselves, we are also being loving to our neighbor, and vice versa. And for ministers especially to attend to our own needs when we are helping folks in crisis. At this time, we're all also in crisis ourselves. So it's a delicate balance of caring for ourselves and being available for our people.
Well, I would simply build on what both of these have said and only refer to spiritual disciplines.
Yeah.
This is a time to deepen those spiritual disciplines. In fact, I, for example, have recommended let's use the CDC recommendations as spiritual disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
It gives them a different meaning. When I wash my hands, I remember my baptism. If I put on my mask, I say a prayer that God will help me to protect others. When I take it off, I thank God that I am accepted for all of that which is behind my mask. In other words, let's use this time to deepen our own spiritual disciplines, and that thereby we will take care of ourselves in a deeper way.
Mm-hmm.
And that will also help other people, our parishioners, to deepen their own spiritual disciplines as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, very early on in the when we had to take shelter in place, I kind of would jokingly say that there's no manual for how I am to offer up pastoral care to those in my community, but I do realize that I have been resourced in some ways, that pastoral care kind of can come from a very deep place. Are there any books or other resources that you might remind church leaders to lean into or to go back to that might help them in regard to the ways in which they provide care to their communities?
I would suggest the book of Psalms.
Yeah.
I mean, the Psalms express the whole gamut of human emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a time to do a lot of lamenting.
Mm-hmm.
And the Psalms give us. So I would look at our own basic resources in terms of the Psalms and the Bible itself.
And I would add to that meditation and the slowness of our spiritual disciplines is really important. I see many ministry leaders, and I pastored for 10 years at 4 different congregations, and often our instinct is to do something, to act. And it is a discipline to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
The book, The Celebration of Disciplines, some of our spiritual mystics, Thomas Merton and others, who remind us that a slowing of our pace will also help those that we care for slow their pace, practice self-love, and some of the need that we find can be met in the presence of God. It's not always time to do something. And I'm sure Denise probably teaches this in her courses, the spiritual discipline of presence with people. Sometimes that's in prayer, even when we're apart.
Absolutely.
Yes, I hope we'll have a chance to talk about that sometime during our time. How are you present when you are physically absent?
Yes.
Because the word or the preposition with is key in all pastoral care. I think it perhaps is one of the most important theological words, is simply with, because it means incarnation. But how do you practice incarnation virtually?
Yeah.
That's the new challenge.
Yeah.
I think the whole pandemic situation invites us to practice what we preach.
Amen.
And that's what you've both been saying in answer to this question. I'll take it in a slightly different tone in terms of books specifically that might be helpful for folks. I used David Switzer's definition of crisis in spiritual care during times of crisis class I happened to be teaching last semester. And he says that it's a crisis when our ability to cope is overwhelmed. So if you're a pastor, some of your people may be coping fine and not experiencing this as a crisis. Others may find that their normal ways of coping are not working and folks need more help for coping. So that's one resource that my ministry students have found helpful. Is it okay to talk about the book I just wrote?
Yes, please do.
I know both of you did too, and you're being modest. But I just had a book published titled Caring: 6 Steps for Effective Pastoral Conversations. And it is a step-by-step guide for ministers about how to guide people to access their own inner wisdom and spiritual resources to solve the problems they're facing. I also do coaching with ministers and others. And in the book, I integrated coaching, psychology of religion, pastoral care, and spiritual direction to come up with kind of a 6-step process. Each letter in the word caring is a 1 step. Connect with God, self, and others is the first step. And I won't go through them all, but that is a really important first step, is finding ways to connect. So, and I'm sure Ken and Leah's books are relevant as well.
Well, I'll also offer my book that was published with 2 co-authors by Abington last year is titled Blank Slate. And the premise is to let go of the way we've always done things. And in the midst of a disruption like the pandemic that we're in, it is okay to set aside our assumptions and even our experience, because most of us have never gone through a time like this. So it is okay to breathe and to set those assumptions aside and to start anew every single day, asking God to give us our daily bread and to lead us forth. And the wisdom of how we operate in ministry often comes from that place. The ability to be with one another comes from that place, and we'll innovate as the church is going to be transformed through this experience, and hopefully for the better in some ways.
Well, one of the realities that has happened is that this pandemic has made shut-ins. We are all shut-ins now and homebound to varying degrees. And it may be that this can be an opportunity for us to shift the margins to where those who have been on the periphery now become central to our life and mission. John Swinton, who has been a mentor for me, a pastoral theologian at St. Andrews in Scotland, who has written the book Dementia, Living in the Memories of God. And of course, that's been an area that I've been dealing with in recent years, both academically and experientially. But he reminds us that Jesus did not go to the margins. Jesus shifted the margins, where those on the sidelines became central. And I think it's time for us to, someone mentioned earlier, practice what we preach. Uh, God's preferential presence among the most vulnerable, the weakest. This may be a time for us to get in touch with the people who have been on our, quote, homebound list or shut-in list, because we now are among them. Mm-hmm. How can we gain from their wisdom? How can we incorporate them? In fact, if I were a pastor of a local church again, I would find ways that they could be connected at this time with the rest of us who are more homebound, because they've been at it a long time.
You actually bring up a point that might help us to answer some of those questions with this one question, which is, we obviously know that people are suffering individually. People are losing their jobs. They are living in very fragile places financially. Leah, I even think about you now being thrust into holding the weight of vocation, and then the vocation of teaching, whatever that might look like with your children. And you didn't get a memo in January that this is what your life was going to look like. And there's also this reality of kind of a collective trauma, that we're all in the same storm. We might be on different boats, but we're all in the same storm. What does it look like to try to provide care for a collective community? And then also too, is it similar to the ways in which we provide care for individuals? And maybe what are some ways that that care might look different based on if it's collective or if it's individual?
Well, one of the things I think is really important is our language. Mm-hmm. And I think we make a shift from pastoral care to community and congregational care. So all of a sudden, our language widens our view of care. And it doesn't just go one way. It's not the professional clergy or the trained minister providing care one way. And as Ken said, we care for one another. Mm-hmm. So mutuality begins to rise up when we realize we are in need. Mm-hmm. One of the very specific tactics that I saw a congregation do the first week that the buildings were closed is to reenact their phone tree. Mm-hmm. Now that seems archaic in 2020 to some folk, but every member of the congregation called the next person on the list and simply said, "How are you? How can I pray for you?" It reminds us that we are all ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we love and care for one another. So I hope our language, we provide care as a community, particularly in that there are individual needs. Mm-hmm. So that one-on-one care is particular, and it's also communal.
Mm-hmm. In a related note, I'm a fan of reenacting the whole idea of a pastoral letter, the biblical sense of the word. I just supervised a doctor of ministry student who was studying how to provide spiritual formation in an online classroom. And part of her research was to discover, that's sort of in the biblical, the letters from pastors to congregations, that there are some parallels with us currently in pandemic, and whether that's a physical letter or an email or a chain that goes from one person to another, I think the whole pastoral letter idea could be a useful thing during this time.
Yes, I would strongly affirm that. That was going to be one of my suggestions, that we need to recover the art of the personal note, handwritten note. There's something about holding that note. And my experience, particularly with those who have been homebound, is they treasure that. They'll display a handwritten note on the table. My wife, Linda, even in her dementia, she the last word she read was her name on a note from someone written to her from our local congregation. She looked at it and said, Linda. That's the last time I ever heard her pronounce her name or read a word, but it was visual. So I think that tactile is important. But I do think it is important, and Denise, you're much more up on this than I am now. But my pastoral training, my CPE was done in the 1960s.
Okay.
Pastoral care was almost seen as, well, the psychotherapeutic model was the primary model, the one-on-one. And so I spent a lot of my ministry doing a lot of one-on-one pastoral care, but you can't do that with masses of people. I wish I had spent more time developing communities of pastoral care. Yeah. And that's what Leah is saying.
I think we really have to do both. I love the image of gardener, that we attend to the whole community and the interactions between things, and this plant needs this kind of soil and this one needs, and we attend to each individual plant.
Yeah, it isn't a one or the other, it's both and. But I also would agree with what Leah was saying about the language. Yeah. I have removed as much as I can ministry to,
yes,
pastoral care to, or even for, and moving more to the preposition with, because there's a reciprocity, a mutuality, a connectedness in all. It's all relational, and that means connected. And I don't like to see pastoral care seen as a programmatic ministry to somebody. I don't want to be made somebody's project. Even don't make me the project that you want to care for me. Care with me. Be with me on my journey.
Pastoral care is my title, but I tend to talk about providing spiritual care with people, or spirituality coaching to help them discern their best next steps or their actions. And I think one of the things we can do is provide opportunities and teach people to care for each other. You know, there's a lot to learn about how do you be present with people, how do you avoid being so anxious that you have to have all the answers, that you can't listen well and help a person connect with God rather than trying to get in there and be God for them. So I think some of what's needed is teaching folks to care for each other, equipping the ministers, equipping the saints to do the work of ministry. And just to plug, my book could be used for that. It's a very simple 6-step process that folks have looked at and said, I could do this with my lay people.
Leah, were you going to
say? If I could
add go ahead.
Another thing, Lisa, about creating this community of caring. You know, churches are now live streaming their worship. I think it's important in those worship services to name these challenges that we're experiencing and that people are experiencing. In participating in one, or listening and participating at a distance in one of those services yesterday, I was so impressed with how the pastoral prayer named those who were experiencing economic stress, those who were experiencing stress within the family. She was naming the very things that people were experiencing. And I think that's important. And that's one way we form this caring community, is what we do when the community is together. So there isn't this live streaming issue of worship and then pastoral care. Those live streaming sessions are pastoral care too.
Mm-hmm. Bishop Carter, you may, oh, sorry, go ahead, Leah. Mm-hmm.
I would just simply add that Denise brought up a coaching model. Mm-hmm. And the essence of coaching is witness, and it's deep listening and asking questions. So the interaction between us, how are you? And then deeply listening. Mm-hmm. What's been most challenging for you this week? And then deeply listening. Not to solve people's problems, not to take the pandemic away because we don't have that power, but to be present and to know how to pray with one another is a way that we care. And we underestimate the small, simple witness of the prayer, as Ken said, in the midst of worship, and how much care that can provide. Often we are trying to solve problems and fix things when presence can be more effective.
You know, this pandemic in many ways has exacerbated, or as my therapist would say, has kind of compounded all of the things that are very real about our human experience. You know, on any given day, we are journeying through life with an illness or mourning or grief or sadness. And then COVID-19 in some ways, I think, just makes that more real for individuals in a way that can feel like a deep trauma. Is there a special advice or words of encouragement that you might say to someone who is in this season feeling that compounded grief or that compounded mourning or that compounded sadness in their lives right now?
I would recommend that folks consider taking advantage of therapeutic services that are offered remotely. If grief is compounded and trauma and, you know, the current grief brings us back to earlier griefs, or somebody dies while this is happening and you can't, the funeral has been changed or social support is different, that for individuals to have a willingness to seek therapeutic help when they feel like they need that kind of help. And also for ministers to be willing to function. Wayne Oates was one of my mentors long ago. He coined the phrase that we can function as a minister of introduction. If we can say to somebody, this thing you're struggling with, this professional helps people with that thing really well. Now, we don't want to send everything to therapists because as ministers, we have a lot to offer. But I think we do need to know when to refer or when people need additional help. We'll continue to be their spiritual guide, coach, minister, and folks can take advantage of additional help.
Well, as one who is grieving the loss of his wife of 58 years in a time of isolation, I can speak some out of experience that there's been a oddly, I'm not sure exactly how to express it, but I'm able to be more in solidarity with others who are, or no, that's not the way to say it. I feel that others are in more solidarity with me now because they're grieving. They're grieving lots of losses. We're all grieving some loss now. But one segment of the population that I think needs special attention are those who are in locked down facilities, nursing homes, hospitals, healthcare facilities. And my daughter, one of my daughters, is the director of social services at a long-term care facility. And I know the stress that she is under because she's caught wanting to help the families whose loved one is dying of causes other than COVID-19, but they're dying alone. I can't imagine having the added pain of not being present with my wife while she passed into God's loving arms. And those people, I think, need some special care. I know dealing with funeral services, memorial services are now difficult, but I think we do need to pay attention to those who are now mourning without the presence of an embrace. I miss an embrace. I miss holding the hand of someone else who is grieving and who cares. So I think to being sensitive to that, and I think it's appropriate, within boundaries, for pastors to also acknowledge their own vulnerabilities. This may be a time that we can say, hey, look, I'm not having it. I'm having some hard times too. I don't mean to diminish somebody else's, but at least to know this is the time we're in this together. Solidarity with one another is being intensified, I think, if we handle it appropriately.
Well, I think you speak so well to the importance of physical presence, touch, holding hands, a kiss on the forehead for a hospital patient, an embrace at a funeral service or church service. And all of those are nonverbal communication, and we've kind of depended on touch and eye contact to communicate some of the things that are kind of too deep for words. But if I have a loved one in a hospital bed and we're on the phone, I have to find ways to put words to what I want to communicate that I would do by embracing her with a hug if I were in the room. So we need to practice things like saying, if I were there, I would take your hand.
Right.
If I were there, I would give you a hug. Or may God's presence provide the loving arms that I can't do for you. And also maybe finding ways to speak some of the words. We use eye contact to say, I love you sometimes without speaking the word. And I think one of the challenges is to find ways to put words to the things that we would communicate non-verbally otherwise. It's kind of like when my children were little, I used to say, okay, use your words. Use your words. And now all the adults need the encouragement to use our words as we care for each other.
Well, I see.
And I would,
go ahead, Leah.
yeah, I would simply give thanks for the technology that we do have available. I think we have underestimated how we can connect over video, and even the inflection of our voice as it's heard expresses compassion. I still do say to my kids, use your words. And often they don't have the words to speak the depth of what they're thinking and how fast their brain is going. But when I can look in their eyes and say, it's okay, slow down, breathe, maybe the words come. So I'm so grateful that even with my parents who live in a different city, when we are on video and they hear the laughter of children or they see the excitement about something we're experiencing, that it brings a bit of joy to us both. So sometimes in this pandemic, we think about all that we have lost, but we don't spend enough time on celebrating that which we do have. So I hope we can do more video calls. We can talk more even when we're apart now. I'm a lot closer to some people than I was before because of what we're going through.
That's a good point. I had a pastor tell me just recently about uh, how he was able to connect members of a family who were all over the country with the person who was dying.
Mm.
And it was through the FaceTime. They arranged to have all of the technology, which I don't understand, but my grandson does, bring the technology into the bedroom. And they were able to say their goodbyes.
Mm.
Right across the street, I watch as loved ones come to the windows of the nursing home and press their hands up against the windows. I even see some kind of delivering the kiss.
Mm.
They're now painting. They are now painting windows around the nursing home with flowers or "I love you." One thing that I do, I take my dog for a walk on the walkway outside the window of the nursing home and wave, because the people inside love animals.
Mm.
And I know many of them because I've been in there on the inside with them. Just finding ways of connecting that way, I think is so important. And I think one of the things this pandemic is doing, it's making us more creative.
Mm.
It's pushing us beyond our comfort zones to find ways of connecting.
A pastor friend of mine has started visiting through the window his church members who don't have computers or video capability. He brings his phone, they get on their phone, they look, they make eye contact through the window and talk by phone. And I thought that was a beautiful picture of a creative way to connect.
Yes.
We're actually going to talk a little bit more when we come back after a quick break. We're going to talk a little bit more about how we might connect with our communities, those who may not have the same level of digital access as others in our congregations or communities. So, Denise, I'm glad that you brought that up so that we can have a place to start again when we come back to this conversation. But we are going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsor, Amplify Media.
Amplify is a space in which Christians can explore their faith more deeply in relationship with one another and be equipped to impact even more people for the gospel. You can even stream your church's services, bringing your congregation together even when they aren't in the same building. Engage your ministry and expand your mission by following these simple steps. Get started with Amplify today.
Thanks to Amplify Media for sharing about their resources. We look forward to hearing more from our panelists about what it means to offer up care during this time of COVID-19. Just before we went to our break, we were talking a little bit about the fact that everyone has different means of access, maybe, to our digital platforms or online. How do we connect and care for those who aren't online, maybe those who are marginally connected to our communities, maybe those who are the most vulnerable in our communities? What are the ways that we might be able to also provide care to them?
Well, Lisa, that's a great question. And I often think we make this too complex.
Mm-hmm.
If we take the initiative to reach people using all the means that we have, it might just be a phone call. And even for those that might not have a phone, they're often connected to someone who does have a phone. Mm-hmm. So in our congregations, if we take the initiative, or even our neighbor just next door, we can talk to them while social distancing, asking, how are you doing? Is there anything you need? Can I pray for you? And is there anyone else that I can be praying for? Because they may have family members or friends that we're not directly connected to, but could use care. Mm-hmm. So one of the principles of community organizing, which is part of my being, is allow the answer to flow from the people closest to the challenge. Don't assume we have the answer. It is okay to not have the answer, but simply to ask the question. But we are called to take the initiative and to reach out in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think an early step is to simply identify who are those people, because they remain hidden often. They don't seek us out. They don't demand attention. So we have to, I think, be very intentional in identifying who are those hidden ones, those silent ones, and then who connects with them. And once you identify those persons, then identify who connects with them. And then perhaps our initiative can be with those who do connect with them, their family members, their social workers, their caregivers, whoever delivers their groceries. Connect with them. And that would be a first step. So I think the first thing is to identify who they are, and then what is their circle, and how can we nurture that circle that's already there. I have a neighbor, for example, here in the community. Every time he drives out of his driveway, if I'm on my way to the mailbox, he says, I'm on my way to the grocery store with my mask on. Can I get you anything? So, Leah, that's what you were saying. That's another way we can just say, do some practical things. Call people up and say, could I go get some groceries for you, or help you in some way?
I think we can also encourage other people to connect with each other in the ways they have available. A pastor I know does small church, a couple of staff members. They're calling every church member every week and just checking in and asking, what do you need? What's going on? What kind of support do you need? And part of what they've started doing is, what are your resources and what do you have to offer to help somebody else? So what started as, Ken, what you were calling individual pastoral care, has become now a way of helping people within the community connect with each other. I think that's really important.
Very good, yeah.
And I would add on that the question of, what does our community need? Often in congregations, we're looking for the broader need from the individual need. So while I might be doing okay, I am aware that in our community there are some needs that our congregation could address. So that might be another extension.
I think that's a very important comment, Leah. This might be a wonderful opportunity for the church to, now that it can't get within its walls, it's already outside the walls, to take advantage of being outside the walls now and meet our neighbors in a caring, loving way. And in so doing, we are ministering with them, and they are meeting the Christ, whether we name the name or not. As we love, we are extending, we are fulfilling the commandment, love one another as I have loved you.
What I love about how this discussion is going is it takes some of the weight off the individual pastor to do everything, be everything, fix everything. I would want to encourage ministers as much as possible to let go of that pressure that everything has to come from me and I have to do everything and I have to know all of the answers, and to take advantage of the human reality that when we define a problem clearly, our minds just start looking for solutions. And I always say that if ministers can learn to ask the right questions, the solutions will emerge from the community or the person you're talking to. And I really feel for, I think ministers, we already carry more responsibility than we need to normally. And then in a situation like this, it's really easy to to add even more emotional responsibility for everything. In my book, I talk about how Henry Nouwen, you spoke about the temptations of Jesus, and he defined Jesus' temptations as to be relevant, to be powerful, and to be spectacular. And I think it's really important for all of us to remember that those were temptations. Those were not job description. That's a temptation. And
I was about to turn around and look for that book, Denise, because I think it's the best book on pastoral leadership that I've read, because it is his book on leadership, isn't it?
yes, exactly.
Christian leadership. And the shadow side of our pastoral role, the temptation to power, the temptation to control, all of those come into play here.
Yeah.
And when those come into play, we wear ourselves out, because in a major pandemic like this, we don't have the solutions.
Yes.
That's one of the things I think we can say with all honesty. I don't know, but I want to be with you. I want to help us find a way forward. I don't know if something happened here in the neighborhood. It could be done by a church. I was just thinking, we had a wonderful, and she happens to be a member of the local congregation in which I and my family participate. She celebrated her 100th birthday last week, but normally we would have a big party for her. Instead of a party for her, she was driven around this neighborhood in a golf cart, and we were alerted ahead of time to be out on the porch. If we wanted to give her a card or a little gift, we all took her little gift. Well, that took about 30 minutes for her to be driven around the neighborhood. She did say to the person responsible here in the community, that was the best birthday I've ever had. Now, she had celebrated 100. Her 100th was her best. I hope when I get to be 100, I can say it's my best. But the community will be the one that'll make that possible, right?
That's right.
So how do we help community here?
That's right. Leveraging the gifts of those around us. I think to all of your points, but Leo, when you said it's just not, maybe we try to make things more complicated. You've mentioned this. We are people of our baptism, and there's a power that can be unleashed in us that is greater than the powers and principalities of this world. And it can show up in the ways in which we care for or care with each other in our communities.
And I think it's so important for those who are doing the hands-on ministry now, the healthcare workers, those who have direct contact with the people from whom we may be isolated, to help them see the spiritual dimension of what they're doing. My daughter does not feel comfortable praying in public. So she was feeling guilty for that. I said, Sandra, don't you understand that you're caring for the residents? When you love them, you are praying. Not all prayer is verbal. The prayer that makes the difference is the one that is more than verbal. It has action associated. But to say, and I said, you are doing your ministry, what you do every day, or the CNAs that cared for my wife, whether they prayed openly or not, their tender, loving care of her was prayer. So how do we, and I tried to help them see that, you are God's presence to them too.
Maybe I'll expand.
Well, absolutely.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Leah. Mm-hmm.
I just want to affirm God's grace, that we have an opportunity to embody God's grace with one another right now. And that's just a beautiful example, Ken, with your daughter. Mm-hmm. Doing with a spiritual lens. God sees you, God loves you, God affirms the care that's being provided. I think about those who are isolated in incarceration and the people who are serving with and on behalf of them every single day, those that are on the margins. I think about the children, some who are isolated with parents working and they're at home. So if we can speak God's grace to those who are on the margins, I love that we keep going back here. That can be life-saving in that moment where a person feels like they're overwhelmed with grief or with sadness or with despair. That is our call.
We can invite people to look for where is the presence of God in the midst of what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. Where is God present as I'm in dialogue with my college student who's home, as we're cooking and eating and doing all the rituals. And, many folks isolated themselves to seek an experience with God in Christian history. And we're now being pushed into a place where we can ask, where is God present? Where is God active? And how can I join in the work that divine love is doing in the world? And what can I learn about love? What can I make of this time? What can I learn? How can I experience God and help other people to experience God? And I think we shouldn't underestimate the benefit of praying for people that we can't reach by one method or another, as Leah talked about, that our prayers do make a difference. And like you can, I kind of feel more of a sense of connection with people I'm physically separated from. When I do intercessory prayer, there's a realness about the connection in spite of the physical distance that is one of the things we don't find ways to talk about very much, but I think it's one of the important lessons for us here.
And one pastor that I know, not only he prayed that intercessory prayer, but he wrote it down and then sent it to the person.
Lovely.
As we kind of close our conversation, I want to give you an opportunity to maybe share, Ken, the example of the individual celebrating 100 years and being driven around on a golf cart, and literally the community, the communion, getting to celebrate alongside this individual. Maybe some other examples that you have seen rise up, creative, I would even say powerful ways that you've seen people provide care for one another in the season that you would like to leave us with.
The example that I think about is twofold. It's the phone call and it's the video chat. And again, I'm going to keep it really simple. I think about my aunt that I spoke to yesterday, who is at home. She is in her 70s. She is relatively well. She does not have a smartphone, an iPad, or a computer. She has just a phone at home that I call her on Sundays to say hello. And I hear the joy in her voice. And I feel the excitement that I get when we connect and I hear her stories of the week. And if we would extend ourselves, if we would set the formal responsibilities aside and connect very simply, very humbly, and invite other people to do the same, we can revolutionize the way we care for each other.
Mm-hmm. Other examples?
An example I have that isn't dramatic but feels really important and profound to me is before all this started, I had a handful of coaching clients who wanted help with discovering their calling, their vocation, their purpose. They were all in a place of discernment. I'm not quite doing what I think I'm called to do, and I'm trying to sort it out. And those folk, they get on the phone with me every week, no matter what's happening with their kids or their life or their job or their house, and they continue to seek to hear how is God speaking to me? What am I called to do? Where is my vocation? And the ongoing listening to God in the midst of a crisis feels really inspiring to me, that folks haven't given up on discerning where they are, what they're called to do, what their next steps are. They're still showing up and doing the work. And I think there's a lot of courage and grace and kind of a testimony to God's sustaining presence for all of us in the midst of this.
I think part of the irony of this pandemic is that while we are separated, we have a unique opportunity to foster community. Mm. That seems contradictory, but I think what Leah and Denise have said, finding ways to extend grace, to participate in grace, the grace that is out there as well as in here. I saw one beautiful example just 2 weeks ago in a healthcare facility. Someone, it was not a programmatic, it happened almost organically. Someone got the idea on National Prayer Day. It doesn't have to be on every day is a National Prayer Day. But why don't we observe Prayer Day by gathering members of the congregation at a healthcare facility? We'll circle the building, keeping our 6 feet distance, wearing our masks. We'll ask the staff that can do so to come out and stand between us and the building. And we will circle the staff and the residents. Mm. And we will sing Amazing Grace. We will read scripture. We will pray. And we would therefore will create this kind of community of caring. We'll wrap this place in love. Mm. My mantra for the last several years of being a caregiver for my wife and working with people with cognitive impairments and challenges, when in doubt, love. Mm. Simply find a way to love. Everybody needs love all the time. Mm.
I think we're going to end on that note, just remembering that the one who is love is also the one who is called Immanuel, a God who is with us and whose witness cannot be compromised and whose witness is made present and made known through us, God's people. I want to thank our panelists for the ways in which they have helped us to know that in a very real way this day. I want to thank you all. And I want to thank you all who joined in on this episode. We do hope that you will join us for our next webinar that will talk about the art of hospitality during this digital age. You can register at amplifymedia.com/now and next. And you can also find the notes from this conversation there at that platform. Thank you so much for being with us this day. May you know that God is with you.